The voicemail is exactly 22 seconds long. Elena has listened to it so many times that the digital file is practically etched into the ridges of her brain. A ghost haunting the spaces between her thoughts. She doesn't even need to press play anymore. When she closes her eyes, the audio plays automatically, unbidden, agonizingly clear. Hey, it's me. A soft crackle of static. The distant wail of a passing siren in the background. I know you're probably deployed somewhere saving the world. But I think someone is following me. I'm leaving the library now. I'll call you when I get back to the dorm. Love you, big sister. Stay safe. Then, a click. Then, nothing. That was 214 days ago. 214 days since Maya. Sweet, 20-year-old Maya with her oversized sweaters and dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse. Vanished into the ether of a damp Boston night. The police called it a tragic runaway case. The FBI called it a dead end. Elena Vance called it a declaration of war. Rain lashed against the rusted corrugated steel of the warehouse, mirroring the relentless, cold fury storming inside Elena's chest. She crouched on the rooftop of an adjacent building in the industrial heart of Seattle. The downpour slicking her midnight black tactical gear. Through the lens of her thermal monocular, she watched the structure below. To the rest of the world, it was an abandoned fishery. To Elena, a former operative for the CIA's Special Activities Center, it was the first bloody breadcrumb on a trail she had spent 7 months hunting down. She lowered the monocular, the glowing green image of heat signatures fading into the stark, gray reality of the seaport. There were 4 men outside, armed, alert, and moving with the disciplined cadence of ex-military. They weren't street thugs, they were professional muscle protecting a high-value asset. That asset was a man named Julian Croft, a mid-level facilitator for a ghost-like human trafficking syndicate known only in whispers as the Labyrinth. Elena ran a gloved thumb over the safety of her suppressed Heckler & Koch USB compact. Her heart rate was a steady, rhythmic 55 beats per minute. In the field, her operators used to call her ice. She was detached, lethal, and devastatingly precise. But tonight, the ice was melting, giving way to a boiling, volatile rage. I'm coming, Maya, she thought, slipping the weapon back into its thigh holster. Just hold on. She clipped her rappel line to a sturdy iron vent and stepped backward off the 5-story ledge. The descent was silent, a shadow dropping through the torrential rain. Elena hit the muddy ground of the alleyway with a soft, barely audible thud, the shock absorbed by bending her knees. She unclipped and melted into the darkness behind a stack of rotting wooden pallets. 20 yards away, the first guard paused to light a cigarette. It was a fatal mistake. The momentary flare of the Zippo ruined his night vision. Elena moved. She closed the distance with the predatory grace of a stalking panther, her boots making zero sound against the wet asphalt. As the guard exhaled a plume of gray smoke, Elena materialized behind him, her left hand clamped viciously over his mouth, snapping his head back, while her right hand drove a ceramic karambit blade upward, finding the soft tissue just beneath his jawline. It was a surgical, brutal strike, severing the brainstem instantly. The man's body went limp, his cigarette hissing as it hit a puddle. She lowered his dead weight to the ground without a whisper of sound. 1 down, 3 to go. Elena wiped the blade on the dead man's coat and drew her suppressed pistol. The rain was her orchestra, masking the symphony of violence she was about to conduct. She rounded the corner of the alley, raising the H&K. The second guard was walking toward her, his assault rifle slung lazily over his shoulder. He saw the shadow detach from the wall, his eyes widening in sudden realization. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, but the word died in his throat as 2 9mm hollow point rounds punched through his chest in rapid succession. Peefed. The suppressor rendered the shots to nothing more than violent sneezes. The kinetic energy threw him backward into a stack of rusted oil drums. The metallic crash alerted the remaining 2 guards at the loading dock. "Hey, Marco, is that you?" one yelled, raising his weapon and stepping into the deluge. Elena didn't hesitate. She broke from cover, sprinting directly into their line of sight. It was a calculated risk. The guards hesitated for a fraction of a second, startled by the sheer audacity of a lone attacker charging them head-on. That hesitation was all Elena needed. Sliding on the wet concrete, she dropped to one knee and fired 3 times. The man on the left took a round to the collarbone and another to the face, collapsing instantly in a spray of crimson. The fourth guard managed to squeeze the trigger of his rifle, sending a burst of 5.56 rounds sparking wildly against the brick wall behind Elena. She rolled over her left shoulder, coming up in a crouch, and fired a single shot. The bullet struck the guard dead center in his tactical vest, winding him, before her second shot found his unprotected throat. Silence descended over the loading dock, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain. The entire engagement had taken less than 12 seconds. Elena stood up, her breath pluming in the frigid air. She felt no remorse, no adrenaline crash. These men dealt in human flesh, in stolen futures and shattered families. To her, they were nothing more than obstacles. She approached the heavy steel door of the warehouse. It was locked from the inside, secured by a heavy-duty deadbolt and a magnetic seal. Elena reached into her tactical vest, producing a small block of C4 explosive no larger than a deck of cards. She molded it over the locking mechanism, inserted a timed detonator, and stepped back around the corner of the brick exterior. 3, she whispered. 2, 1. The explosion was a muffled, concussive thump that blew the steel door inward with terrifying force, tearing the hinges straight out of the concrete wall. Elena moved in immediately, her pistol raised, cutting the darkness with an underbarrel flashlight. The interior of the warehouse smelled of decaying fish, engine oil, and the sharp tang of ozone from the blast. Julian Croft. Elena's voice rang out, cold and commanding, echoing off the high tin ceiling. You can hide, but you know as well as I do that you're already dead. The only variable left is how much it's going to hurt. A frantic shuffling sound echoed from an elevated catwalk to her right. Elena swept her flashlight beam upward, catching a glimpse of a well-dressed man in a tailored suit scrambling toward an emergency exit, his designer shoes slipping on the grated metal. She fired a shot, not to kill, but to maim. The bullet struck the metal railing inches from Croft's hand, sending a shower of sparks into his face. He shrieked, tumbling backward and landing hard on the catwalk grating. In seconds, Elena was up the iron stairs, her boots ringing like a death knell. She stood over Julian Croft, a man who built his wealth by auctioning off innocent lives to the highest bidder. He was pathetic now, crawling backward on his hands and knees, blood seeping from a scrape on his forehead. Wait, please, whoever sent you. I'll double it. I have money. Offshore accounts. Croft babbled, his voice high-pitched with terror. He looked up at the terrifying, rain-soaked apparition standing over him. Elena didn't say a word. She stepped forward, bringing the heavy heel of her combat boot down squarely on Croft's right kneecap. The sickening crack of shattering bone echoed through the warehouse, followed instantly by Croft's agonizing, guttural scream. He curled into a fetal position, clutching his ruined leg, sobbing uncontrollably. Elena crouched down, grabbing him by the lapels of his ruined Tom Ford suit, and hauled him up so they were face to face. Her eyes, usually a bright, warm amber, were now as dark and unforgiving as the abyss. I don't want your money, Julian, Elena whispered, her voice dangerously soft. I want a name. I don't know what you're talking about, he gasped through his tears. Elena drew her karambit knife, pressing the curved, razor-sharp tip against the pulse point on his neck. 214 days ago. Boston. A 20-year-old girl named Maya Vance was taken. I know your crew handled the transit. Where did she go? Croft's eyes widened in realization. The blood drained entirely from his face. You're the sister. The Phantom. They said you were a myth. I am a nightmare. Elena corrected him, pressing the blade just enough to draw a single, hot drop of blood. Where is she? You don't understand. Croft choked out, his chest heaving. If I tell you, the labyrinth will kill me. They'll peel my skin off while I'm still breathing. Julian, look at me, Elena commanded, her grip tightening until he was forced to meet her gaze. If you don't tell me right now, you won't live long enough to worry about what they'll do to you. I will dismantle you, piece by piece, and I will start with your other knee. Where is Maya? Croft squeezed his eyes shut, a sob tearing from his throat. The auction. She went to the Black Orchid auction. Where is it held? It changes. Every month. But they are recruiting. Next week. Miami. A private yacht party. It's a front. They select the new inventory there. And they pick the guards for the auction. Croft was speaking rapidly now, desperate to save his own life. I can't get you in as a buyer. Only the elites get those invites. It's impossible. Elena stared at him, the gears in her mind turning with lethal calculation. The desperation, the grief, the burning need to see Maya's face again, it all crystallized into a single, terrifyingly clear plan. She couldn't breach the organization from the top down. They were too insulated, too paranoid. There was only one way to find the auction. She had to go through the front door. She had to become the very thing they wanted. You're not going to get me in as a buyer, Julian, Elena said, her voice eerily calm as she stood up, leaving the trafficker trembling on the cold metal floor. She looked out the broken window into the stormy night, making a vow to the darkness. You're going to get me in as inventory. 72 hours. That's how long it took to dismantle Elena Vance and create Lena. A woman forged from weakness and desperation, engineered specifically to be consumed by the labyrinth. Elena stood before the stained, cracked mirror of a dive motel room in Overtown, Miami. The air conditioner was a broken lung, wheezing wet, hot air into a room that smelled of old tobacco and chemical cleaner. Outside, the neon pulse of the city promised ecstasy. But inside this room, Elena was performing a dissection of her own soul. She began with the hair. The practical, shoulder-length brown mane that had never gotten in her way during a fight was chopped and dyed a brittle, bleached blonde. It hung thin and limp around her face, instantly aging her, robbing her of vitality. Next, she attacked her physicality. As a Tier 1 operator, her body was a weapon, sculpted through years of brutal training into cords of lean, explosive muscle. Traffickers didn't want threats, they wanted compliance. For 3 days, she had barely eaten, drinking only enough water to stay conscious. She needed the look of the hollowed out, the desperate hunger that made a person malleable. She applied makeup not to beautify, but to corrupt. Dark, smudged shadows under her eyes to simulate drug use and sleep deprivation. She applied a chemical to her fingertips to soften the calluses earned from thousands of hours gripping pistol slides and knife hilts. Finally, she stripped away the armor. She discarded the tactical gear, the karambit, the suppressed H&K. In their place, she donned a cheap, flimsy sequined dress that offered no protection and left her horribly vulnerable. It felt like wearing a shroud. She looked into the mirror and tried to find the amber fire that usually burned in her eyes. It was gone, buried deep beneath layers of manufactured submissiveness. Only, Lena stared back, a drifter, an addict, a ghost waiting to be claimed. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. It wasn't physical pain, it was the psychological torment of voluntarily stepping out of the light of her competence and into the absolute darkness of helplessness. Every instinct screamed at her to arm herself, to fight, to dominate. She had to strangle those instincts, one by one. For Maya, she whispered, the name a lifeline in the drowning pool of her new identity. The marina at Miami Beach was a dazzling display of excessive wealth. Multi-million-dollar yachts lined the docks like sleeping leviathans, white fiberglass gleaming under the aggressive sodium lights. Laughter, expensive champagne, and high-tempo electronic music drifted across the water. It was a playground for the world's elite, utterly oblivious to the horror show playing out just beneath the surface. Following the instructions extorted from Julian Croft, Elena, now Lena, stumbled down Dock M. She played the part perfectly. She tottered on cheap heels, her gait uneven, her gaze shifting frantically between the opulence and the shadows. Near the end of the dock lay the Serena, a stunning 150-foot superyacht. This was the recruitment hub. Croft had said the magic words were to ask for Silas. A massive brute of a man stood at the bottom of the Serena's gangway. He wore a crisp white polo and navy shorts, the uniform of a luxury yacht crew. But the jagged scar cutting through his eyebrow and the hard, dead look in his eyes screamed, cartel enforcer. Party's private, sweetheart, the giant said, his voice a low rumble. stepping into her path and blocking the view of the deck. Elena forced her lower lip to tremble. She looked up at him, letting her eyes go wide and watery, channeling the terrifying reality of the situation. "Please," she slurred slightly, injecting a desperate edge into her tone. "Julian Croft, in Seattle. He told me to come. He said Silas could help me. I need work. I'll do anything." The guard looked her over with sickening clinical detachment. He wasn't seeing a person, he was appraising merchandise. He assessed the damage she'd done to herself, the thin frame, the track marks she'd faked on her arm, the desperation in her eyes, and saw value. He keyed a radio on his shoulder. "Silas. Gotta walk in at the gangway. Mentioned Seattle. Looks like quality stock for the Orchid. High yield, but needs immediate processing." There was a burst of static. Then a smooth, cultured voice replied, "Send her up." The guard stepped aside, gesturing with a meaty hand. "Up you go. Lena, don't make a scene, or you won't even make it past the first deck." Walking up that gangway was the single most defining act of courage in Elena's life. She was stepping away from the rule of law, away from her identity, away from any hope of rescue. She was stepping into the belly of the beast. The interior of the yacht was nauseatingly opulent. Italian leather, polished mahogany, and crystal chandeliers that shimmered with the motion of the ocean. In the main salon, dozens of stunning women, looking equally desperate, were lined up like livestock. Men dressed in tailored linen suits walked along the line, touching them, examining teeth, whispering critiques. It was a meat market disguised as a high-fashion party. Elena was ushered past this line and into a smaller, soundproofed stateroom at the stern. A man sat behind a minimalist glass desk, watching her enter. This was Silas. He wasn't a brute like the guard. He was elegant, slender, with slicked back gray hair and a face that could be described as aristocratic if not for the utter lack of humanity behind his icy blue eyes. He was wearing a silk bathrobe over gray slacks. He looked comfortable, and that made him infinitely more terrifying. He didn't just participate in this evil, he luxuriated in it. "Lena," Silas said, testing the name on his tongue like a rare vintage wine. He didn't stand. He just watched her tremble in the center of the room. "Seattle. Julian Croft. A clumsy man. Julian. Effective, but clumsy. My sources tell me his warehouse was compromised recently." Elena felt her heart stop. This was the moment. He knew. Her cover was blown before it had even begun. Fight. Her primal brain commanded. Kill him. Take his gun. Escape. But she didn't. Elena Vance died, and Lena took over completely. She dropped to her knees, letting out a genuine, jagged sob of terror. It was easy. The terror was real. "I don't know about any warehouse. Please," Julian just said. "He said I was beautiful. That I could make money here. He sold me his last fix and told me to come to Miami. I'm broke. I'm sick. I just need help." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She was a master of combat. And right now, her combat was emotional manipulation. She was betting everything on Silas's arrogance, his belief that he could control any woman who walked through that door. Silas watched her cry for a long, agonizing minute. The only sound was the low thrum of the yacht's engines. Then, she heard him stand, heard his leather shoes click on the hardwood floor as he approached her. He stopped directly in front of her. She could smell his expensive cologne, sandalwood and bergamot, covering the stench of the evil he oversaw. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Elena slowly raised her tear-streaked face. Silas reached out with a manicured hand, grabbing her jaw with surprising, painful strength. He tilted her head back, inspecting her face, his thumb rubbing roughly against the hollow beneath her eye. He looked deep into her eyes, searching for deception, for resistance, for the ghost of the operator she had tried so hard to bury. Elena stared back, projecting nothing but absolute brokenness, hunger, and a sickening desire to please. She allowed herself to visualize Maya's face again, not as a motivator for revenge, but as the gaping, agonizing hole of loss that defined Lena's existence. Silas's grip tightened, the pain making her wince. And then, a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "You are indeed beautiful, Lena," he murmured, releasing her jaw. "Broken things often are. They are so eager to be put back together by the right hands." He turned away, walking back to his desk, dismissing her presence as if she were a piece of furniture he had decided to keep. "You will fit perfectly," he said, not looking at her as he made a note on an iPad. "You will be processed immediately. You will be inventory for the Black Orchid auction. In 2 days, we sail. Until then, you will be stripped, cleaned, and taught your new reality." He hit a button on the desk. The door opened, and the large guard appeared. "Take the stock below," Silas ordered. "Level 4 protocols. No errors." As the guard gripped Alina's arm, hauling her to her feet, she didn't resist. She let him drag her. She was led away from the salon, down narrow, steel crew stairs, deeper and deeper into the bowels of the yacht. Finally, they reached a heavy, insulated steel door. The guard swiped a keycard, and it hissed open. The smell hit her first, a mix of fierce sweat, unwashed bodies, and chemical disinfectant. The room was the size of a shipping container, illuminated only by a harsh, caged bulb. There were 20 other women already inside, huddled on thin mattresses on the floor. Some were crying silently, others just stared into the darkness, their eyes dead. The guard shoved Elena inside. She tripped over her cheap heels, falling hard onto the concrete floor. The steel door slammed shut behind her, the heavy bolts sliding into place with a definitive, tomb-like clang. Darkness, absolute and complete. She was trapped, unarmed, surrounded by victims, and completely at the mercy of the monsters she had come to kill. Elena rolled onto her back, staring up at the caged bulb. She was in. The true descent had begun, and the nightmare was only just beginning. Time didn't exist in the hold of the Serena. There were only intervals between the clang of the steel door. Elena Vance. No, she had to stop that. Elena was dead. Lena was the ghost inhabiting this aluminum nightmare. Lena spent the first 6 hours, which felt like 6 days, huddled in the furthest corner from the flickering, caged bulb, her knees drawn tightly to her chest, chin resting on her scarred collarbone. The sensory assault was overwhelming. The air was heavy, hot, and thick with the miasma of 20 unwashed bodies, fierce sweat, and the chemical tang of the bilge pump fighting the sea. The darkness was absolute when the single bulb failed, leaving only the terrified, wet sound of dozens of girls weeping in languages Lena didn't understand. Every instinct honed in the sack shrieked at her. Assess, escalate, break free. Her mind constantly prioritized the 2 guards who rotated shifts every 4 hours. Their routines were sloppy, predictable. One had a weak knee, the other was too fond of the bottle of cheap rye he smuggled in his waistband. Elena knew 6 ways to kill each of them before they could even draw their service pistols. But Lena had to sit. Lena had to tremble. Lena had to breathe in the rot and become it. The hardest battlefield wasn't the Afghani mountains or the Syrian streets. It was the interior landscape of her own brokenness, which she had to meticulously construct and inhabited every second. Around what she guessed was hour 12, the shadows near her shifted. A slender hand touched her forearm. Lena flinched violently, a genuine reaction to the unexpected proximity. She looked up, her bleached, brittle blonde hair falling over her eyes, into the gaze of a girl who looked no older than 17. She was pale, Ukrainian perhaps, with massive, hollowed-out green eyes that reflected the dim light. "You speak English?" the girl whispered, her voice a dusty thread. Lena managed a weak nod. "I am Katya," the girl said. "I see you come in. You look different." Lena's pulse spiked. Compromise? She had to check her aggression, her tactical alertness. She forced her voice into a pathetic, high pitch. "I'm sick, Julian. He said I could make money. I need something to feel better." She mimicked a junkie's twitch. Katya's expression softened, morphing from suspicion to a deep, terrible empathy. "There is no medicine here, little sister. Only preparation." "Preparation for what?" Lena rasped, pressing her acting skills to their absolute limit. "The Orchid," Katya said, the name leaving her lips like a curse. "They call it the Clearing. A private island. The buyers come from all over the world. Kings, politicians, men who own the world. They buy us." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her knees. "My sister. She came here 2 years ago. I thought I'd find her. But now I know. They do not let you go." A jolt of agonizing recognition slammed through Lena's chest. My sister. The echo was deafening. The rage she had spent days strangling roared back to life. White hot and dangerous. Maya. Katya's sister. All of them. She wanted to scream. She wanted to snap the bars off the bulb and use them to tear through the hull. Instead, Lena did something harder. She reached out and took Katya's cold hand. They will pay, Lena whispered. It was a vow, soft as a ghost's kiss, but edged with the cold steel of her true self. The clang of the door shattered the tentative alliance. Bright, sodium light flooded the small space. 4 guards entered this time. Not the sloppy 2. They were level 4 protocol, heavier. Better armed, wearing tactical vests and balaclavas. Up, against the wall, all of you, one guard yelled, his voice garbled by the mask. The girls scrambled, a terrified herd, pushing against the freezing metal wall of the hull. Katya held tight to Lena's hand. The 4th guard stood in the doorway. And through the shadows, Lena recognized the silhouette. Silas. He wasn't in his silk bathrobe this time. He wore a crisp white linen suit that seemed to glow in the dirty hold. Looking like an angel in hell. He walked down the line, evaluating the inventory. He stopped in front of Katya. He reached out with a manicured hand, tracing the line of her jaw, tilting her head back to inspect her teeth. Katya trembled so hard her teeth rattled. But she didn't move. Silas smiled, a terrifyingly gentle expression. You're prime stock, my dear. The clearing will be fortunate to have you. He moved on. He stopped in front of Lena. He looked at the fake track marks on her arm, the hollowed eyes, the desperate tremor she maintained in her hands. And you, Lena, Silas said, his smooth, cultured voice filling the silence. The question is, are you ready to become what you truly are? Or are you still holding on to the pathetic dream of the woman you were? Lena forced herself to raise her gaze, allowing the utter, consuming desperation she cultivated to shine through. She didn't speak, she just let her bottom lip tremble and the tears, genuine tears of rage and loss, spill down her cheeks. Silas watched her for a long, calculating minute, then he chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. Good, the broken are easier to reshape. He turned to the guards. The processing begins tonight. Medical exams first. Standard procedures. I want a clean bill of health on every single asset before we make port at the clearing in 24 hours. Any resistant stock, discard them. The guards moved in. This wasn't a party anymore. This was a cattle drive. Girls were grabbed, numbered with markers on their arms, and shuffled towards the door, 2 at a time. Lena and Katya were grabbed together. The heavy hand of a guard clamped onto Lena's shoulder, shoving her forward. The physical contact sent a shockwave of defensive fury through her. But she smothered it. She was Lena. She was inventory. As she was marched out of the dark hold and towards the brightly lit processing area, she looked back at Silas. He was watching them go. The orchestrator of this nightmare, smiling at his prophet. Elena Vance made a promise to that smile. She would stay alive. She would survive the processing, the degradation, the violation of her autonomy. She would get to the clearing. She would become the asset they wanted. And then, she would burn their entire world down, beginning with the man who smiled while selling souls. The transition from absolute darkness to surgical, blinding light was a physical blow. Elena squinted, her pupils screaming in protest as she and the other women were shoved into the Serena's medical bay. It was a sterile, gleaming white nightmare hidden within the belly of the luxury yacht. The smell of the bilge water was instantly replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of iodine, bleach, and latex. To a civilian, it might have looked like a high-end private clinic. To Elena, a veteran of black site interrogations and field triage, it looked like an abattoir. This wasn't a place of healing, it was a quality control checkpoint for human merchandise. Strip, a voice barked. It wasn't Silas this time. It was a man in a pale blue surgical scrub top and tailored slacks. He had thinning hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the bored, detached demeanor of a man checking the tread on a set of used tires. This was the cartel's physician. The guards, 4 of them armed with stun batons and suppressed sidearms, formed a perimeter. You heard the doctor. The largest one growled, slapping the heavy black baton against his palm. Clothes off. All of them. Now. A collective, shuddering gasp rippled through the room. Beside Elena, Katya let out a whimpering sound, her thin arms wrapping instinctively around her own torso. Elena's jaw tightened so hard her teeth ached. Control the breathing. Box breathing. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. She forced her trembling hands to reach for the hem of her cheap, sequined dress. Every fiber of her Tier 1 training demanded violence. The geometry of the room mapped itself instantly in her mind. Doctor. 3 paces. Scalpel on the metal tray. Carotid artery. Guard 1. 4 paces. Baton. Disarm. Pivot. Fire his weapon into guard 2 and 3. She could end the lives of the 5 men in this room in under 8 seconds. But 8 seconds of violence would condemn them all. The ship was crawling with heavily armed mercenaries. There was nowhere to run on the open ocean. And most importantly, killing them now wouldn't get her to the Black Orchid auction. It wouldn't get her to Maya. So, the lethal operator vanished, and the broken junkie remained. Elena pulled the dress over her head, letting it fall to the pristine white floor. She stood there, shivering violently under the blast of the air conditioning, adopting the slumped posture of the defeated. The doctor moved down the line with chilling efficiency. He checked teeth, shone penlights into terrified eyes, palpated abdomens, and drew vials of blood to screen for diseases. He dictated notes to an assistant with an iPad. Acid 12. Good bone structure. Mild malnutrition. Clear, the doctor muttered, moving past a sobbing girl from Venezuela. He stopped in front of Elena. He didn't look at her face. He grabbed her right arm, his latex-gloved fingers pressing brutally into her bicep, turning her wrist to examine the inside of her elbow. He scoffed, tracing the angry red track marks Elena had meticulously fabricated using a sewing needle and theater makeup. Junkie, the doctor sneered, dropping her arm as if it were diseased. He checked her pupils. Elena had intentionally hyperventilated in the hallway to dilate them, mimicking withdrawal. Heart rate is elevated. Diaphoretic. She'll need a mild sedative to stop the shaking before the showcase. Mark her down as a discount lot. High maintenance. Please, Elena whispered, her voice a pitch-perfect raspy whine. I just need a little something. Please, my bones hurt. Shut up, the guard behind the doctor snapped. Raising his baton, Elena cowered, throwing her hands over her head. The perfect picture of an abused addict. The doctor moved on. I passed, Elena thought, the cold relief warring with the burning humiliation. I'm in. Then, the doctor stopped in front of Katya. The young Ukrainian girl was frozen in terror, tears streaming silently down her pale cheeks. When the doctor reached out to grab her jaw to check her teeth, Katya flinched, a violent, involuntary jerk away from his touch. Hold still, the doctor snapped, losing his clinical patience. He reached for her again, harder this time. Panic overtook Katya's paralysis. She shoved the doctor's hand away and took a step back, shaking her head. No, please don't touch me. The shift in the room's energy was instantaneous. The board guards suddenly went rigid. The largest guard, the one with the baton, lunged forward with a curse. Stupid bitch. He didn't reach for Katya's arm. He raised the heavy stun baton, aiming a brutal, horizontal strike directly at the side of the young girl's head. A blow like that wouldn't just enforce compliance, it would fracture her skull. Elena didn't think, she reacted. She couldn't use a martial arts block. She couldn't slip the strike and counter. She had to stay in character. Throwing herself forward, Elena let out a hysterical, desperate shriek. No, don't, I'll do anything. Give me the medicine. She intentionally tripped over her own bare feet, launching her body clumsily between the guard and Katya. She didn't brace for impact like a soldier, she took it like a civilian. The heavy, rubberized steel of the baton slammed into Elena's left shoulder blade. The sickening crack of the impact echoed off the surgical tiles. Pain, bright and blindingly white, exploded through her upper back. The sheer kinetic force of the blow lifted her off her feet, sending her crashing hard into the metal instrument tray. Scalpels, gauze, and metal bowls clattered to the floor in a chaotic din as Elena went down in a tangle of limbs. She gasped, her lungs seizing. The pain was real, agonizingly real. It felt like the bone had splintered, But as she lay on the cold tiles, tasting blood where she had bitten the inside of her cheek, a dark, triumphant satisfaction bloomed in her chest. She had absorbed the kinetic energy. Katya was untouched, and Elena hadn't broken cover. She was just a hysterical junkie who got in the way. "Get this trash off the floor," the doctor yelled, backing away from the mess. The guard stood over Elena, breathing heavily, the baton still crackling with electricity. He kicked her viciously in the ribs. "Crazy junkie bitch, next time I'll fry your teeth out." Elena curled into a fetal position, sobbing loudly, playing the part of the broken animal to perfection while secretly cataloging her injuries. Collarbone intact, scapula bruised, maybe a hairline fracture, ribs bruised. Combat effective? Yes. Pain level? Manageable. Katya dropped to her knees beside Elena, her hands hovering over her, weeping openly now. Lena, I am sorry. I am so sorry. Get them dressed and get them out of my sight," the doctor hissed, straightening his glasses. "Put them in the VIP holding pen. We're making our final approach." Bruised, bleeding, and shoved back into their clothes, the women were marched out of the medical bay. They were not taken back to the dark hold. Instead, they were led up 2 flights of stairs to a carpeted corridor, ending in a large room with barred, reinforced windows. As the heavy door locked behind them, Elena leaned heavily against the glass, clutching her throbbing shoulder. Katya was immediately by her side, helping her sit. "Why did you do that?" Katya whispered in the dim light of the cabin, her green eyes wide with awe and terror. "He could have killed you." Elena looked at the young girl. For a fleeting second, the carefully constructed mask of Lena slipped. The amber fire returned to her eyes, sharp and predatory. "Because," Elena whispered back, her voice losing its pathetic rasp, settling into a cold, deadly cadence, "we are going to survive this. Both of us." Before Katya could process the sudden change in the woman beside her, the deep, rhythmic thrum of the yacht's engines suddenly shifted. The vibration beneath their feet slowed. Elena pulled herself up, peering out the reinforced porthole. The storm clouds had broken, giving way to a bruised, purple twilight, rising from the dark expanse of the ocean, illuminated by massive, sweeping floodlights, was an island. It was lush, heavily forested, and dominated by a sprawling, fortress-like estate at its peak. Heavily armed patrol boats circled the perimeter like sharks. This was it, the end of the line, the black heart of the syndicate. "Welcome to the clearing," Elena murmured to herself, her hand drifting instinctively to her side where her holster used to be. The descent was over. The infiltration was complete. Now, the war would begin. The heat of the island hit them like a physical blow, thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the salty tang of the Caribbean Sea. As the Serena's heavy gangway lowered onto the concrete pier, the brutal reality of their destination came into sharp focus. The clearing wasn't just a tropical getaway, it was a modern fortress masquerading as a paradise. Massive floodlights swept the dark water, and the perimeter was lined with 10-foot electrified fencing completely concealed by imported, lush foliage. Elena shuffled down the ramp, keeping her head bowed, her fake blonde hair shielding her eyes, while Katya and the other women wept in terrified silence. Elena's mind was moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. "Sector scan," her internal operator commanded. 2 guards at the pier, armed with FNP-90 submachine guns. Compact, high rate of fire, good for close quarters. 2 more on the bluff. Pan-tilt zoom cameras on the concrete pylons, sweeping a 180-degree arc every 14 seconds. Blind spot near the generator hummed to the east. Every detail was filed away, building a 3-dimensional tactical map in her head. She ignored the throbbing agony in her left shoulder from the baton strike. Pain was just data, it told her she was alive. They were loaded into the back of customized, open-air electric trams, the kind used at high-end golf resorts. Modified with heavy iron grating. As they drove up the winding, palm-lined road toward the main estate, Elena caught her first glimpse of the Black Orchid auction. The compound was a sprawling masterpiece of glass, steel, and white concrete, glowing against the dark jungle like a diamond on a bed of velvet. Luxury vehicles, Maybachs, armored G-wagons, and Rolls-Royces were parked in a pristine semicircle. Men in bespoke tuxedos and women in haute couture mingled on the sweeping terraces, sipping champagne from crystal flutes. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi's Winter. It was elegant, it was civilized, and it made Elena want to vomit. "Move, inside, head down," a guard barked, prodding them out of the tram and toward a discreet service entrance around the back of the mansion. They were herded into a massive, subterranean locker room. The transition was jarring. The sterile white walls were lined with racks of designer clothing, vanity mirrors surrounded by harsh bulbs, and an army of stylists wearing matching gray scrubs. A sharp-featured woman with a clipboard and a headset stepped to the front of the terrified group. "Strip them. Wash them. I want the bruises covered on the prime stock. But leave the marks on the discount lots. Some of our VIPs prefer the authentic, broken aesthetic." Elena felt Katya's hand slip into hers, squeezing so hard her knuckles turned white. "Lena," Katya breathed, her voice barely audible over the sound of running water and crying women. "I am so afraid." "I know," Elena whispered back, her voice slipping just a fraction out of her raspy, junkie persona, offering a tone of steady, grounding steel. "Keep your eyes on the floor. Do exactly what they say. Do not draw attention. Wait for the crack in the glass." "What crack?" "The one I'm going to make," Elena promised softly. They were stripped and shoved into industrial showers. The water was freezing, meant to shock them into compliance. Afterward, the stylists descended like vultures. Elena was forcefully sat in a chair, her damp, bleached hair yanked and blow-dried. A makeup artist aggressively applied heavy foundation to her pale face, darkening the shadows under her eyes, accentuating the bruised, hollowed-out look of a desperate addict. They dressed her in a sheer, slip-like garment made of black silk that offered zero warmth and even less dignity. It was designed to make her look fragile, a moth caught in a spider's web. When they were finished, the women were lined up in a staging hallway right behind the main ballroom. The heavy, mahogany double doors were cracked open just an inch, allowing the sounds of the auction to bleed through. The string quartet had stopped. A man was speaking into a microphone. It was Silas. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests," Silas's smooth voice drifted through the gap. "Welcome to the culmination of our quarter. Tonight, we offer you exclusivity. We offer you power. We offer you ownership." Polite, cultured applause echoed in the ballroom. Elena peered through the crack in the doors. The ballroom was a theater of nightmares. Dozens of the world's most elite, untouchable predators sat in velvet-lined chairs. Titans of industry, corrupt politicians, cartel ghosts, all hiding behind the absolute anonymity of immense wealth. In the center of the room was a raised circular stage, brightly lit like a museum display. "Let us begin with Lot 1, Silas announced. The guards shoved a young girl from Colombia through the doors. She stumbled onto the brightly lit stage, blinded by the spotlights, covering her face as the bidding began. The numbers thrown around were staggering. 500,000, a million. It took less than 3 minutes to auction off a human life. Elena felt the cold, familiar grip of absolute focus settling over her. The rage was still there, but it was no longer a wildfire, it was a compressed, white-hot laser. She needed a weapon. She needed an isolated target. She needed intel on where Maya was being held. Lot 4, the woman with the clipboard snapped, pointing her pen at Katya. "You're up." Katya froze, her breath hitching in a strangled gasp. A guard stepped forward, grabbing her roughly by the arm. "No," Katya sobbed, her feet sliding on the polished floor as she was dragged toward the doors. Lena. Elena's muscles coiled, her hand twitched, ready to strike the guard's larynx and shatter the woman's clipboard into her eye. She was inches away from throwing the entire mission away to save the girl. But before she could move, a man pushed through the mahogany doors from the ballroom. He was short, heavily sweating, and smelled intensely of stale cigars and expensive scotch. He wore a red velvet dinner jacket and had eyes that crawled over the women like cockroaches. He held up a hand, stopping the guard dragging Katya. Hold on, the man slurred, waving a gold-ringed finger. He bypassed Katya completely and walked straight toward Elena. He stopped inches from her, his breathing heavy, He looked at her fake track marks, the heavy, dark makeup, and the way she was intentionally favoring her bruised shoulder. Silas said he brought in some damaged goods this run. The man purred, reaching out to trace the angry purple bruise on Alina's collarbone. Elena forced herself to flinch, dropping her gaze to the floor. I don't want a shiny new toy, the man said over his shoulder to the clipboard woman. I want to bid on this one, but I need to inspect the merchandise first. Make sure she's pliable. The clipboard woman looked annoyed but nodded respectfully. Of course, Mr. Van der Wick, VIP protocol. Guard, take lot 7 to viewing room B for Mr. Van der Wick. Alina's heart hammered a steady, lethal rhythm against her ribs. Viewing room B, an isolated room. A wealthy buyer with a high-level clearance. It was the crack in the glass she had been waiting for. A guard grabbed her uninjured arm and marched her down a side corridor. Away from the auction floor. Away from Katya and the other women. Mr. Van der Wick followed close behind, humming a discordant, sickening little tune. They reached a heavy oak door marked with a brass B. The guard unlocked it, shoved Elena inside, and stepped back. 5 minutes, sir. Then she goes to the block. 5 minutes is all I need to know if she breaks right. Van der Wick chuckled, stepping into the room and locking the door behind him. The room was soundproofed, lavishly decorated with leather couches and dim, moody lighting. There were no cameras, just Elena and the monster in the velvet jacket. Van der Wick turned to her, unbuttoning his collar. All right, junkie, let's see how much fight you have left in you. Elena stood in the center of the room. The trembling in her hands stopped. Her slumped posture vanished, her spine snapping perfectly straight. She slowly raised her head. The fake, desperate tears gone, replaced by the dead, terrifying amber fire of a Tier 1 operator who had just been given a green light. None at all, Elena said, but it wasn't the raspy voice of Lena. It was cold, clear, and perfectly steady. Van der Wick paused, a flicker of confusion crossing his sweaty face. What did you say? Elena didn't answer with words. She moved. She closed the gap between them in a fraction of a second. Her movement an explosive blur of kinetic violence. Before he could even open his mouth to scream, Elena's right hand shot forward, her stiffened fingers striking the bundle of nerves in his brachial plexus. His left arm instantly went numb. With her left hand, ignoring the searing pain in her shoulder, she grabbed the lapels of his velvet jacket, pivoted her hips, and threw his entire body weight over her leg. Van der Wick slammed onto the hardwood floor with a bone-rattling thud, the breath exploding from his lungs in a wet gasp. Before he could process the fact that the fragile, broken junkie had just taken him down with military precision, Elena dropped her knee squarely onto his chest, pinning him to the floor, her hand clamped over his mouth, sealing his scream inside his throat. Listen to me very carefully, Mr. Van der Wick, Elena whispered, leaning down so her lips were inches from his ear. She sounded like the Reaper. You have exactly 5 minutes to tell me everything you know about a girl named Maya Vance, or you are going to leave this room in a garbage bag. The hunt had officially begun. The heavy oak door of viewing room B muffled the civilized, horrifying sounds of the auction outside. Inside, the only sound was the frantic, wet wheezing of Arthur Van der Wick. Elena's knee was a stake driven into his sternum, pinning the heavy man to the imported Persian rug. Her left hand clamped securely over his mouth and nose, cutting off his air supply and drowning his screams. Her right hand gripped his thick wrist, bending it backward at an unnatural, agonizing angle. The shock in his watery, bloodshot eyes was absolute. He had paid for a broken toy. He had gotten a buzzsaw. I am going to remove my hand from your mouth, Elena whispered, her face inches from his. The amber fire in her eyes was cold and dead, the gaze of a predator assessing a kill. If you scream, if you even breathe too loudly, I will snap your wrist, drive your ulna bone through the skin, and use the shards to blind you. Nod if you understand. Van der Wick nodded frantically, tears of pain and terror leaking into his sparse mustache. Elena slowly lifted her hand from his mouth, maintaining the crushing pressure on his chest and wrist. He gasped for air, his chest heaving under her knee. Who are you? He choked out, his voice a pathetic squeak. You're not inventory. I am your reckoning, Elena said smoothly, leaning in. A girl, Maya Vance, 20 years old, brown hair, green eyes, taken in Boston 7 months ago. She was brought into the syndicate. Where is she? Van der Wyck swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't know every piece of stock. There are hundreds. Elena didn't hesitate. She shifted her weight and applied an extra millimeter of pressure to his bent wrist. Tendons popped audibly. Van der Wyck let out a muffled, strangled shriek, his body thrashing weakly. Wrong answer, Elena murmured. You're a platinum-level buyer. You know the inventory. You know the tiers. A girl like that, prime age, clean background, she wouldn't be in the general auction. Where do they keep the specialty assets? The conservatory, he gasped, his eyes rolling back slightly from the pain. Please, stop. Elena eased the pressure just a fraction. What is the conservatory? Silas's private collection. Van der Wyck stammered, his face pale and clammy. The girls who don't go to the block. The ones kept for the inner circle. The oligarchs. The cartel bosses. It's a glass structure on the north edge of the compound. Maximum security. Elena's mind raced, downloading the intel. North edge, high-value target location. How do you get in? You can't. It's biometric. Only Silas and his lieutenants have access. My VIP card only gets me into the residential wings and the auction floor. Elena stared into his eyes, looking for the telltale dilation of a lie. He was telling the truth. He was too terrified to lie. Thank you, Arthur, Elena whispered. Before he could process the gratitude, Elena shifted her grip, her right arm snaked under his chin, the crook of her elbow locking securely around his throat, while her left hand grabbed her right bicep. A textbook rear naked choke, modified for a ground pin. She applied pressure, not to the windpipe, which would cause crushing pain and panic, but to the carotid arteries on either side of his neck. Van der Wyck's eyes went wide. He grabbed at her arm with his free hand, but his movements were already sluggish. By cutting off the blood flow to the brain, unconsciousness was mathematical. 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3. His struggling weakened. 4, 5. His hands fell away, dropping limply to the rug. 6, 7. His eyes rolled back, and his body went entirely slack. Elena held the choke for 3 extra seconds to ensure a deep state of unconsciousness. Then released him. She didn't kill him. A dead VIP would trigger a massive lockdown the second he was found. An unconscious one bought her time. He would be out for at least 10 minutes. And when he woke up, he'd be disoriented and confused. She rolled him over and patted him down. From his velvet jacket pocket, she extracted a heavy, black plastic keycard embossed with a gold V. From an ankle holster hidden beneath his tailored trousers, she found something even better, a customized, silver North American Arms .22 Magnum mini revolver. It was a gentleman's gun. Tiny, holding only 5 rounds, and wildly inaccurate past 10 feet. But to a Tier 1 operator, 5 rounds was a localized apocalypse. Elena slipped the tiny revolver into the waistband of her black silk slip. It was cold against her skin. She stood up, testing her left shoulder. The adrenaline was masking the worst of the pain, but a deep, throbbing ache radiated from her collarbone down to her elbow. She rolled the joint, wincing slightly. It was functional. That was all that mattered. A sharp knock rapped against the heavy oak door. Mr. Van der Wyck? The muffled voice of the guard bled through the wood. 5 minutes are up, sir. Silas wants the lot back on the block. Elena moved with silent, fluid grace. She positioned herself flat against the wall. On the hinged side of the door, she slowed her breathing, her face an emotionless mask. Sir, I'm coming in. The lock clicked. The brass handle turned. The heavy door swung inward, blocking Elena from view. The guard stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the dim lighting, landing immediately on Van der Wyck's prone body on the rug. What the? He never finished the sentence. Elena pivoted around the edge of the door. She didn't go for a strike, she went for leverage. Her right hand shot out, grabbing the guard's tactical vest, violently pulling him off balance and deeper into the room. As he stumbled forward, Elena brought her right knee up in a vicious, shattering strike directly into his face. The sickening crunch of breaking cartilage filled the small room. The guard's head snapped back, his tactical helmet flying off. Before his body could hit the floor, Elena's right hand chopped down on the back of his neck, hitting the brainstem and shutting his nervous system down instantly. He crumpled like a discarded puppet. Total elapsed time, 2 seconds. Elena immediately stripped him of his gear. She couldn't wear the tactical vest, it was too bulky and would draw instant gunfire if she was spotted. But she took his comms earpiece and fitted it into her left ear, hiding the wire beneath her bleached blonde hair. Then, she unholstered his primary weapon, a customized Glock 19 with an extended magazine and a threaded suppressor. She checked the chamber. A hollow point round gleamed in the dim light. A full magazine, 19 rounds of 9mm Salvation. Elena held the Glock in a low ready stance. The transformation was complete. Lena was gone, left behind like a shed skin on the Persian rug. The woman standing in the dim light, dressed in a sheer silk slip, barefoot, gripping a suppressed pistol with lethal familiarity, was a ghost returning from the grave. She keyed the comms unit, listening to the chatter. Bidding on Lot 7 is suspended. Security. Check viewing room B. Van der Wick isn't answering his phone. They were already suspicious. The clock was accelerating. Elena cracked the door open and peered into the hallway. The corridor was clear. To her left lay the double mahogany doors leading back to the auction floor, where Katya and the others were waiting for their turn on the block. To her right, the corridor stretched deeper into the residential wing of the estate, leading toward the north edge, toward the conservatory, toward Maya. Every instinct pulled her to the right. The mission was Maya. Collateral damage was acceptable. But as she stepped into the hallway, she heard Silas's voice echoing from the ballroom. A minor delay. Ladies and gentlemen, in the meantime, let us move to Lot 8. A pristine specimen from Eastern Europe. Elena froze. Lot 8, Katya. She closed her eyes. She remembered the 17-year-old girl holding her hand in the freezing dark hold of the ship. She remembered Katya trying to protect her from the doctor in the medical bay. Damn it, Elena thought, the amber fire in her eyes flaring dangerously. She couldn't leave her. If Katya was sold tonight, she would disappear into a black hole, never to be seen again. Elena raised the Glock, checking the sight picture. She made a tactical calculation. Causing chaos on the auction floor would trigger a massive security response. But it would also draw the guards away from the perimeter and the conservatory. It was a high-risk diversion. Hold on, Maya, Elena whispered into the empty hallway. I have to break some things first. She turned left. She walked toward the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom, her bare feet making absolutely no sound on the polished hardwood floor. The predator was no longer hiding. It was time to introduce the wolves to the lion. The mahogany doors were thick, designed to keep the screams of the broken in and the guilt of the wealthy out. Elena stood perfectly still outside them, her bare feet planted on the hardwood floor, the suppressed Glock 19 gripped tightly in her right hand. Through the earpiece she had stolen, the tactical frequency was suddenly alive with static and panicked voices. Command, this is Sector 4. We have a man down in viewing room B. VIP is unconscious. Guard is dead. I repeat, we have a breach in the holding area. The countdown in Elena's head hit 0. The element of surprise was evaporating by the second. She pressed her eye to the slight gap between the double doors. The ballroom was bathed in a warm, golden light that made the diamonds on the attendees' necks sparkle. On the raised circular stage, bathed in a harsh white spotlight, stood Katya. The 17-year-old girl was trembling violently, her arms wrapped around her thin frame. She was wearing a sheer white dress that made her look like a ghost. Silas stood next to her, a microphone in his hand. A shark's smile spread across his aristocratic face. 2 million, Silas purred, gesturing to a Saudi prince in the front row. Do I hear 2.5 for Lot 8? Unblemished, exquisite, a true collector's item. Elena scanned the room with terrifying speed. 4 tangos visible, 2 flanking the stage, armed with concealed sidearms, 2 at the main double-door exit at the far end of the ballroom, carrying compact submachine guns, 50+ civilians, high risk of collateral damage. To a SWAT team, This was a hostage situation requiring hours of negotiation. To Elena, a ghost from the Special Activities Center, it was a math problem. And she had the solution in her hand. All units, lock down the auction floor. The radio in her ear barked. Target is armed and highly dangerous. Shoot to kill. Time's up, Elena thought. She didn't kick the door. That was for the movies. Kicking wasted balance. Instead, she hit the heavy mahogany with her right shoulder, using her forward momentum to throw the doors wide open. She stepped into the golden light of the ballroom. A terrifying apparition. She was dressed in a torn black silk slip, her bleached blonde hair wild, her bare feet silent, and her eyes burning with an ancient, lethal fury. The two guards flanking the stage reacted first. Their hands went for the bulge beneath their tailored suit jackets. They were fast. Elena was instantaneous. She didn't even break her stride. She raised the Glock, both eyes open, the tritium sights finding their target with muscle memory forged in 100 firefights. Peefed, peefed. The suppressor coughed twice. The guard on the left took a 9mm hollow point round directly to the bridge of his nose. His head snapped back, and he collapsed onto the velvet carpet like a puppet with its strings cut. Before his body even hit the floor, Elena had already pivoted her wrists. Peefed, peefed. The guard on the right managed to clear his weapon from its holster. But he never got to level it. 2 rounds punched through his sternum, destroying his heart. He crumpled backward into a tray of champagne flutes, sending crystal and expensive vintage crashing to the floor. For one agonizing second, the ballroom was dead silent. The billionaires and oligarchs simply stared, their brains failing to process the sudden, violent intrusion of reality into their insulated sanctuary. The suppressed gunshots had sounded like a heavy staple gun. They didn't understand they were watching men die. Then, a woman in the second row screamed. It was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Absolute chaos erupted. The wealthy elite, the kings of industry and masters of the criminal underworld, shattered into a stampeding herd of terrified animals. Chairs were overturned. People trampled each other, scrambling frantically for the side exits. "Get down," Silas roared, dropping the microphone and diving behind the heavy oak podium on the stage. Elena moved through the panic like water flowing around jagged rocks. She kept her weapon tight to her chest, retaining her firing arc, her eyes locked on the 2 remaining guards at the far exit. They were struggling to push through the fleeing crowd, raising their MP5 submachine guns. One of them panicked, firing a short, uncontrolled burst into the ceiling. Plaster rained down on the screaming crowd. "Clear the line," the guard screamed, trying to get a shot at Elena. Elena didn't give him the chance. She dropped to one knee, ignoring the flare of agony in her bruised shoulder. Using an overturned velvet armchair for cover, she lined up the shot through the chaotic gaps in the crowd. She squeezed the trigger. Peefed. The bullet grazed the guard's shoulder. He flinched, his aim wildly thrown off. Elena fired twice more. 1 round caught him in the throat. He dropped his weapon, clutching his neck as he fell backward through the double doors. The second guard, seeing his partner go down in a spray of red, abandoned his post and sprinted down the hallway in a blind panic. The immediate threats were neutralized. Total elapsed time since breaching the doors, 12 seconds. Elena rose from behind the chair and sprinted toward the stage. Katya was still standing in the dead center of the spotlight, frozen in absolute shock. The screaming, the blood, the shattered glass, it was too much. She was hyperventilating, her eyes wide and unseeing. Elena vaulted onto the 4-foot stage with the athletic grace of a panther, landing softly next to the terrified girl. "Katya!" Elena shouted over the din of the alarms that had just begun to blare throughout the compound. The girl didn't respond. Elena holstered the Glock at her hip, grabbing Katya by the shoulders and giving her a hard shake. "Katya, look at me." Katya blinked, her green eyes finally focusing on Elena's face. She looked at the blood splattered across Elena's pale cheek, at the terrifying, cold competence in her posture. "Lena," Katya whispered, her voice trembling. What are you?" "I'm the crack in the glass," Elena said, her voice a sharp, commanding bark. "And we are leaving, right now." From behind the heavy oak podium, a movement caught Elena's peripheral vision. Silas. He was rising from his crouch. A silver, engraved 1911 pistol gripped in his manicured hand. His aristocratic face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He leveled the heavy .45 caliber weapon directly at Alina's chest. "You ruined my auction, you filthy bitch," Silas hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Elena didn't have time to draw her Glock. She didn't have time to push Katya out of the way. Instinct took over. Elena reached into the waistband of her silk slip, her fingers wrapping around the tiny, pearl-handled .22 Magnum revolver she had taken from Van der Wyck. It was a desperation play. The gun was notoriously inaccurate. Essentially a belly gun meant for point-blank range. Silas was 15 feet away. Elena drew the tiny revolver and fired in a single, fluid motion. Bang! The unsuppressed crack of the Magnum round was deafening in the enclosed space. It wasn't a kill shot. Elena hadn't aimed for center mass. She had aimed for the largest target available in a split second. The .22 hollow point struck Silas squarely in his right bicep, shattering the bone and tearing through the muscle. Silas screamed, dropping the heavy 1911 as his arm went entirely useless. Spraying blood over the polished wood of the podium, he collapsed backward, clutching his ruined arm, cursing in a blind rage. Elena didn't wait to see if he would try to pick the gun up with his left hand. She grabbed Katya's hand, her grip like a steel vise. "Run," Elena commanded. She dragged the teenage girl off the back of the stage, disappearing behind the heavy velvet curtains just as a squad of heavily armed tactical guards, level 5 security, burst through the front doors of the ballroom. "Target is behind the stage," a guard bellowed over the radio chatter in Elena's ear. "Flank them, do not let them reach the residential wing." Elena pulled Katya through a narrow service corridor behind the stage, her bare feet slipping slightly on the polished linoleum. They were in the labyrinth now. The entire island was awake, angry, and hunting them. "Where are we going?" Katya sobbed, struggling to keep up with Elena's punishing pace. Elena drew her Glock 19 again, her eyes burning with singular, terrifying purpose. She had saved the girl. Now, it was time for the mission. "North," Elena said, her voice a promise of absolute violence. "We're going to the conservatory." The service corridors of the estate were a labyrinth of gleaming stainless steel and stark white tile, a sharp contrast to the velvet and gold of the auction floor. Overhead, strobing red emergency lights painted the walls in violent, rhythmic flashes, accompanied by the deafening, synthesized wail of the compound's general alarm. Elena pulled Katya into a narrow alcove just outside the main catering kitchen. She pressed a finger to her lips, ordering absolute silence, and strained to listen past the blaring sirens. In her stolen earpiece, the tactical frequency was a hive of controlled panic. "Team Alpha, secure the perimeter. No vehicles leave the island. Team Bravo, sweep the residential wing. Silas is down. I repeat, Silas is down. Medical to the ballroom, now." Elena checked the magazine of her stolen Glock 19. 14 rounds of 9mm left. She had the tiny .22 Magnum tucked securely in the waistband of her slip. With 4 rounds remaining, it wasn't an arsenal, but she had dismantled terrorist cells with less. Beside her, Katya was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The adrenaline of the escape was crashing, leaving behind the freezing reality of their situation. The 17-year-old was barefoot, wearing nothing but a sheer white dress, trapped on an island swarming with mercenaries who had orders to kill. "Lena," Katya whispered, her breath hitching, "they are going to find us. We can't outrun them." Elena holstered the Glock and turned to the girl. She reached out, gripping Katya's icy shoulders. The bruised, desperate persona of Lena was entirely gone. In the strobing red light, Elena's amber eyes were ancient and impossibly steady. "Listen to me," Elena said, her voice dropping to a calm, hypnotic register, a technique she used to ground panicked assets in war zones. "Fear is a liar. It tells you that you are helpless. You are not. You are breathing, you are standing, and you are with me." Katya swallowed hard, staring at the blood drying on Elena's cheek. You are not a junkie. You are a soldier." "I am a sister," Elena corrected softly. "And right now, I need you to be a soldier too. Can you do that for me? Katya, can you stay quiet and follow my exact footsteps? Katya looked at Alina's eyes. Finding an anchor in the storm, she gave a small, jerky nod. Good, Elena said. We need to cross the open courtyard to reach the north wing. It's going to be exposed. When I say move, you run like the devil is on your heels. Elena peered around the edge of the alcove. Through a set of reinforced glass double doors lay the estate's manicured central courtyard. Beyond the hedges and stone fountains, about 100 yards away, an immense structure glowed in the tropical night. It was a massive, architectural dome made of reinforced glass and curved steel. Nestled against the encroaching jungle, it looked like an exotic greenhouse. A jewel box built to hold the rarest of flowers. The conservatory. Bravo 2. I have movement near the kitchens. A voice crackled in Elena's earpiece. Moving to intercept. Time to go. Elena breathed. She pushed the glass doors open. The humid, jasmine-scented air hitting them instantly. The tropical storm from the day before had left a thick, heavy mist rolling over the manicured lawns. It was perfect cover. Elena led the way, sprinting across the wet grass, her bare feet making zero sound. She moved in a low, predatory crouch, using the stone planters and heavy marble statues for concealment. Katya followed, her white dress a ghostly blur in the fog. They were halfway across when the spotlight hit them. It was a sweeping halogen beam from a guard tower on the eastern wall. It cut through the mist, illuminating Katya for a fraction of a second. Contact. Courtyard center. A guard yelled from a balcony above them. The staccato bark of an assault rifle shattered the night. Chunks of marble exploded from the statue Elena and Katya were using for cover, spraying them with sharp, stinging dust. Stay down. Elena shoved Katya flat against the wet grass behind the stone base. Elena didn't cower. She rolled out from behind the statue, dropping to one knee. She didn't have a rifle, she couldn't engage the tower effectively. But the guard on the balcony was only 40 yards away, leaning over the railing to get a better angle. Elena raised the Glock. She didn't look at the sights, she felt the geometry of the shot. She exhaled smoothly, pausing her breath at the bottom, and squeezed the trigger twice. Peefed, peefed. The guard on the balcony jerked backward, his rifle firing wildly into the sky as he collapsed over the railing. He tumbled 2 stories down, landing in the decorative koi pond with a heavy, sickening splash. Move. Elena grabbed Katya's arm, pulling her to her feet. They sprinted the remaining 50 yards, the halogen spotlight frantically sweeping the grass behind them, chasing their shadows. Elena practically threw Katya behind a thick, concrete pillar just as a burst of automatic fire chewed up the grass where they had been a second before. They were there, the north wing. Standing before them was the conservatory. Up close, it was even more intimidating. The glass wasn't just reinforced, it was bulletproof. 2 inches thick, framed in solid titanium. Inside, bathed in soft, warm light, was a sprawling indoor jungle. Exotic orchids bloomed from the walls. A small waterfall cascaded into a heated pool. And scattered among the lush foliage were plush, velvet-lined lounging areas. And there were the girls. Elena saw 3 young women inside, dressed in silk robes, sitting on a circular couch. They weren't tied up or chained. They didn't need to be. The glass dome was a perfect, inescapable terrarium. They looked beautiful, and they looked entirely dead inside. Elena scanned the heavy steel door. There was no keyhole, no handle, just a sleek, black biometric scanner that required a retinal scan and a thumbprint. It's locked, Katya whispered, gasping for air. How do we get in? Elena's mind raced. Explosives? None. Force? The glass would withstand a rocket-propelled grenade. Biometrics? I need Silas. Or a lieutenant. Suddenly, the heavy thud of combat boots echoed from the paved walkway to their left. Someone was coming around the perimeter. Fast. Elena shoved Katya behind a thick cluster of palmetto bushes flanking the entrance. She pressed herself flat against the cool titanium frame of the conservatory door. Merging with the shadows, the Glock raised and ready. A single guard jogged into view. He wasn't standard security. He wore heavy, black tactical armor, night vision goggles pushed up on his helmet. and the insignia of the cartel elite on his shoulder. He carried an HK-416 assault rifle. This was a level 5 operator. A hunter. He slowed his pace, sweeping his rifle across the bushes, his head on a swivel. He knew they were close. Elena held her breath. 3 steps, 2 steps. As the guard passed the titanium frame, Elena struck. She stepped out of the shadow, her left hand grabbing the hot barrel of his assault rifle and violently shoving it upward, away from her and Katya. At the exact same moment, she stepped inside his guard, bringing the muzzle of her suppressed Glock directly under his chin, pressing it hard into the soft tissue above his tactical collar. The guard froze. He was a professional. He knew the feel of a loaded gun pressing against his brainstem. He let go of his rifle, raising his hands in a slow, universal gesture of surrender. Not a sound, Elena whispered, her voice colder than the glass behind her. She quickly stripped him of his comms unit and his sidearm. Kicking his rifle away, she grabbed him by the collar of his tactical vest and slammed him hard against the biometric scanner of the conservatory door. "Open it," she commanded. The guard scoffed. A dark, arrogant sound. "Go to hell, bitch. My clearance doesn't open the conservatory. Only Silas and the boss can." Elena didn't argue. She shifted her grip, grabbing the guard's thumb, and jammed it onto the glass pad of the biometric scanner. A red light flashed, followed by an automated female voice. "Access denied. Level 5 security clearance insufficient." He was telling the truth. The sound of dogs barking erupted from the courtyard. They were deploying the K9 units. They had less than 2 minutes before the bloodhounds caught their scent. Elena looked through the bulletproof glass into the gilded cage. Her eyes scanned the 3 girls inside. None of them were Maya. Despair, cold and heavy, threatened to swallow her. Had Van der Wyck lied? Was Maya dead? Was this entire descent into hell for nothing? Just as she was about to execute the guard and make a desperate run for the docks, a 4th figure stepped out from the dense foliage inside the glass dome. The girl was wearing a simple blue silk robe. She had shoulder-length brown hair, cut unevenly. She looked thin, pale, and her posture was heavy with exhaustion. She walked slowly toward the glass, looking out into the misty night, drawn by the sound of the alarms. Elena's heart stopped. The world around her, the sirens, the barking dogs, the terrified guard pinned against the door, simply vanished. The girl pressed her hand against the bulletproof glass, staring out into the darkness. She had green eyes. "Maya," Elena breathed, the name a fractured, agonizing prayer leaving her lips. Inside the glass cage, Maya Vance stood just inches away, separated by 2 inches of impenetrable polycarbonate and a small army of mercenaries closing in. Elena tightened her grip on the guard's collar, the amber fire in her eyes roaring back with the force of a supernova. She was going to break this glass, even if she had to use the bones of every man on this island to do it. The barking was getting closer. The guttural, vicious snarls of Belgian Malinois tracking dogs echoed through the mist, tearing through the manicured courtyard. They had less than 60 seconds before a heavily armed strike team descended on their position. Elena stood perfectly still, the suppressed Glock 19 pressed brutally under the jaw of the level 5 mercenary. Her amber eyes were locked on the green eyes of her sister on the other side of the bulletproof glass. Maya couldn't see her. The glass was heavily tinted from the outside, turning it into a black mirror in the tropical night. Maya was simply staring out at the flashing red emergency lights, her face a pale mask of exhaustion and despair, completely unaware that her salvation was standing 3 feet away. "Lena," Katya whimpered from behind the palmetto bushes, her voice trembling. "The dogs. I hear the dogs." Elena snapped back to reality. The tactical operator overrode the grieving sister. "Shut up and stay down, Katya," Elena ordered, her tone flat and devoid of panic. She shoved the mercenary hard against the titanium frame of the conservatory door. The biometric scanner was a dead end. Bullets were useless against 2-inch polycarbonate. If she couldn't hack the lock, she had to destroy the door. Elena holstered the Glock and kept her left forearm pressed against the guard's throat. Pinning him with her right hand, she frantically patted down his heavy tactical vest. Spare magazines, a combat knife, flashbangs. Her fingers brushed against a rigid, heavy pouch on his lower back. She ripped the Velcro open. A grim smile touched Alina's lips. It was a linear-shaped charge, a strip of C4 explosive encased in a copper V-shaped housing. Designed specifically by military breachers to cleanly cut through reinforced steel hinges. The guard felt the weight leave his pouch. His eyes widened in absolute, unfiltered panic. Are you insane? That's a structural breaching charge. You set that off this close. The overpressure will liquefy our lungs. It's designed for standoff detonation. Then I guess you're going to be my standoff, Elena whispered. She peeled the adhesive backing off the shape charge and slapped it vertically along the dead center of the titanium doorframe. Right over the internal locking mechanism. She pulled the blasting cap from the guard's shoulder strap and jammed it into the C4. Twisting the mechanical timer. 10 seconds, Elena said calmly. She grabbed the guard by his heavy ceramic-plated vest and violently threw him backward onto the wet grass. Katya, cover your ears and open your mouth, Elena screamed, diving behind the thick concrete base of a marble planter. Dragging the mercenary down with her, she forced the man's armored body on top of her own, using him as a human blast shield. 3, 2, 1. The explosion didn't boom. It cracked like the whip of an angry god. The shockwave was a physical wall of force that tore through the humid air, shredding the palmetto bushes and shattering the nearby marble statues into lethal shrapnel. The mercenary on top of Elena grunted in agony as a jagged piece of stone embedded itself in his shoulder. Ears ringing, adrenaline flooding her system, Elena shoved the groaning guard off her and sprang to her feet. The conservatory door hadn't completely blown open, but the explosive force of the copper jet had sliced clean through the titanium locking bolts. The 2-inch thick bulletproof glass was heavily spider-webbed, glowing white in the center from the sheer thermal heat of the blast. It was compromised. Elena took 2 running steps and launched a devastating front kick directly at the glowing, weakened center of the door. With a tortured screech of tearing metal, the heavy door buckled inward and crashed onto the polished stone floor of the indoor jungle. Screams erupted from inside. The 3 women in silk robes scattered like terrified birds, diving behind the lush, exotic ferns and the indoor waterfall. Elena stepped through the smoke and the ruined door, her Glock raised, sweeping the interior. The humid, jasmine-scented air of the conservatory was now choking with the smell of cordite and pulverized concrete. Maya, Elena yelled, her voice tearing from her throat. Through the drifting gray smoke, a figure emerged. Maya was trembling violently, her hands raised defensively over her head, backed against a wall of blooming purple orchids. She was terrified of the explosion, terrified of the woman covered in blood and dust stepping through the wreckage. Elena lowered her weapon. Her hands, which hadn't shaken when facing down 4 armed guards, suddenly began to tremble. She took a step forward, the light catching her face. The heavy, dark makeup was smeared, and the bleached blonde hair was matted with sweat. But the underlying structure of her face, the sharp jaw, the amber eyes, was unmistakable. Maya, Elena said softly, her voice breaking. Maya froze, her green eyes widened, scanning the blood-soaked, feral woman standing before her. She blinked, once, twice, as if trying to wake up from a hallucination. The posture, the voice, it pierced through the trauma and the terror. Maya whispered, the syllable catching in her throat. Elena? Elena dropped the Glock onto the grass. She crossed the distance between them in 2 massive strides and pulled her little sister into a crushing, desperate embrace. Maya collapsed against her, her legs giving out completely. She buried her face in Elena's bruised shoulder, letting out a raw, agonizing wail that held 7 months of absolute hell. She clung to Elena's torn silk slip as if letting go meant falling into the abyss. I've got you, Elena choked out, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her own dirt-streaked face. She buried her hand in Maya's unevenly cut brown hair, kissing the top of her head. I'm right here, baby girl, I've got you. Nobody is ever going to touch you again. For 10 seconds, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no cartel. There was no island. There was only the shattered, beautiful reality that the hunt was over. She had found her. But a Tier 1 operator's grace period never lasts long. Bravo team. We have a massive detonation at the conservatory. Advancing on the position, the radio in Alina's discarded earpiece screamed from the floor. At the exact same moment, the first of the Belgian Malinois burst through the smoke of the ruined doorway. Teeth bared, a low, terrifying growl rumbling in its chest. Alina's eyes snapped open, the sister vanished, the soldier returned. She pushed Maya gently but firmly behind her. Stay behind me, do not move. Alina scooped the Glock off the floor with her right hand. With her left, she reached down to the unconscious mercenary she had dragged inside and picked up his dropped HK-416 assault rifle. Katya, get in here, Alina shouted toward the courtyard. Katya stumbled through the smoke, coughing violently, her white dress ruined with dirt and blood. She took one look at Maya, then at Alina holding the assault rifle, and scrambled behind the safety of the indoor waterfall. Outside, the heavy thud of combat boots multiplied. Flashlights cut through the mist, crisscrossing over the breached doorway. Target is inside the glass house, a voice roared from the courtyard. Form a perimeter, suppressing fire on my mark. Alina checked the magazine of the HK-416. 30 rounds of 5.56 armor-piercing ammunition. She kicked a heavy stone bench over, creating a makeshift barricade facing the ruined door, and rested the barrel of the assault rifle on the stone edge. She looked back at Maya and Katya, both huddled together in terror. Keep your heads down, Alina commanded, her amber eyes reflecting the strobing red emergency lights. A cold, terrifying smile touched her lips. Let them come. The Belgian Malinois was 70 pounds of pure, trained aggression, a heat-seeking missile made of muscle and teeth. It cleared the smoking, ruined doorway of the conservatory in a single bound, its paws finding purchase on the slick, blood-spattered marble. Behind the overturned stone bench, Alina didn't flinch. She didn't have the luxury of hesitation. Before the dog could close the 15-foot gap and lock its jaws around her throat, Alina raised her right hand. The suppressed Glock coughed twice. Peefed, peefed. The hollow point rounds struck the animal center mass. Its momentum carried it forward, crashing heavily into the overturned planter just inches from Alina's bare feet. A tragic casualty of a war it didn't understand. Contact. A voice screamed from the mist-shrouded courtyard. The K9 is down. Light it up. Light the whole damn greenhouse up. The night erupted. It wasn't a localized gunfight, it was a firing squad. At least a dozen mercenaries positioned behind the palmetto bushes and the manicured hedges opened fire simultaneously. The sound inside the glass dome was apocalyptic. The 2-inch thick polycarbonate glass had been designed to withstand small arms fire. But it wasn't built to survive a sustained, concentrated barrage of 5.56 and 7.62 caliber armor-piercing rounds. The bullets struck the dome like a localized meteor shower. The glass didn't shatter immediately, it spider-webbed, groaning and shrieking under the immense kinetic energy, turning the transparent walls into opaque sheets of cracked, glowing white frost. Inside the conservatory, it was pure terror. Maya and Katya screamed, covering their heads as chunks of pulverized orchids and shattered stone rained down around them. The other 3 captive women huddled together in the shallow water of the indoor pool, weeping hysterically. Alina remained completely still, her cheek pressed against the cold polymer stock of the HK-416 assault rifle. Her left shoulder throbbed with blinding agony every time she moved, but she locked the joint in place. Pain was just a signal, she chose to ignore it. She was staring through the fatal funnel, the narrow, smoking gap of the blown-out titanium door. It was the only way in. Any man who stepped through that threshold had to cross her line of sight. A heavy boot stepped through the smoke, a silhouette in tactical gear. Alina exhaled, let the crosshairs settle, and squeezed the trigger. Pop, pop, pop. The short, controlled burst of 5.56 rounds tore through the smoke. The point man's head snapped back, his helmet flying off as he collapsed backward onto the wet grass outside. Man down, someone yelled. Another shadow tried to dart across the opening, attempting to flank the doorway. Alina tracked the movement with cold, mechanical precision. Pop, pop. The shadow dropped with a gurgling scream, clutching a shattered femur. "Hold your fire," a commanding, authoritative voice barked over the din from the courtyard. "Cease fire. She's got the doorway zeroed. It's a suicide push." The deafening roar of automatic weapons abruptly stopped, leaving only the sound of ringing ears, whimpering girls, and the gentle, mocking trickle of the indoor waterfall. Elena didn't lower her weapon. She knew exactly what this pause meant. They were adapting. A frontal assault was a meat grinder, so they were going to change the geometry of the battle. "Bravo team, bring up the heavy acid," the voice commanded, loud enough to echo through the shattered doorway. "If we can't push the door, we take down the walls. Bring up the M240. Elena's blood ran cold. An M240 was a medium machine gun, chambered in 7.62 by 51 mm NATO. It fired hundreds of rounds a minute. It wouldn't just spiderweb the bulletproof glass, it would chew through the titanium framing and collapse the entire glass dome on top of them like a crystal guillotine. "Elena," Maya whispered, her voice cracking as she crawled through the dirt and ruined ferns to crouch beside her sister. Her green eyes were wide with absolute terror. "What do we do? We're trapped." Elena looked at her sister. The urge to just hold her, to shield Maya's body with her own, was overwhelming, but shielding her wouldn't save her. "We don't stay in the kill box," Elena said, her mind scanning the architectural layout of the dome with hyper-vigilant speed. She looked up at the groaning, cracked glass ceiling. She looked at the heavy titanium support beams. Then, her eyes fell on the indoor waterfall. It cascaded down a wall of artificial rock into a deep, heated pool, but a pool of that size in a sealed environment required a massive, industrial-grade filtration system, and industrial filtration systems required maintenance access. "Katya," Elena snapped, pointing her Glock toward the water. "Get the others. Move to the pool, now." Katya didn't hesitate. She scrambled through the debris, grabbing the arms of the three paralyzed women in the silk robes, dragging them toward the cascading water. "Maya, listen to me," Elena said, grabbing her sister's face, forcing Maya to meet her amber eyes. "Behind that waterfall, there has to be a drainage grate or a maintenance hatch leading to the compound's subterranean plumbing. You are going to dive in, find it, and open it." I can't," Maya stammered, shaking her head frantically. "Elena, I don't know how." "You can, and you will," Elena said, her voice fierce, leaving no room for doubt. "You survived 7 months in hell. Maya, you are a Vance. You are stronger than you know. Go." A loud, mechanical clack echoed from the courtyard outside, the unmistakable sound of a heavy machine gun being mounted on a bipod. "M240 is up," a voice yelled. "Clear the backblast. Fire on my mark. Move." Elena shoved Maya toward the water. Elena turned back to the barricade, shouldering the HK-416. She couldn't kill the machine gunner, he was positioned too far back, hidden behind a thick concrete fountain. But she could buy Maya 30 seconds. "Mark." The night ripped open. The M240 sounded like a canvas sail tearing in a hurricane. A solid line of red tracer rounds slammed into the front of the conservatory. The bulletproof glass finally failed, with a sound like a bomb detonating in a crystal shop. Massive, jagged sheets of polycarbonate exploded inward. Shrapnel rained down in a deadly, glittering storm, shredding the exotic orchids and slicing through the thick leaves of the ferns. Elena ducked behind the stone bench, pressing herself flat against the marble floor as the heavy 7.62 rounds chewed through the barricade inches above her head. Stone chips bit into her arms and cheek. The air was thick with white dust and the acrid smoke of burning cordite. "Keep your heads underwater," Elena screamed to the girls in the pool. Through the chaos, Elena popped up over the deteriorating barricade. She didn't aim for the gunner, she aimed for the massive, 3-tiered marble fountain he was using for cover. She dumped the rest of her 30-round magazine into the stone, sending blinding chips of rock and geysers of water exploding into the gunner's face. The heavy machine gun fire stuttered, then paused as the gunner flinched away from the shrapnel. The rifle clicked empty. Elena tossed the useless HK-416 aside and drew her Glock. "Maya," Elena yelled, looking back toward the waterfall. Maya breached the surface of the churning pool, gasping for air, her wet hair plastered to her face. There's a hatch. It's heavy. Iron grating. I pulled the locking pin. But it's rusted. Get out of the way. Elena sprinted away from the barricade, running directly through the hail of falling glass and incoming fire. A bullet grazed her thigh, a hot, searing line of fire, but she didn't even break stride. She dove headfirst into the heated pool, the water silencing the deafening roar of the gunfight above. Beneath the surface, the water was illuminated by glowing blue LED lights. Elena swam toward the artificial rock wall behind the waterfall. Maya was right, there was a heavy, industrial iron grate bolted over a massive, 3-foot-wide drainage pipe. Elena grabbed the rusted iron bars, planting her bare feet against the slick tiles of the pool wall. She ignored the tearing agony in her left shoulder. She channeled every ounce of adrenaline, every drop of rage, and pulled with the strength of a woman possessed. With a deep, metallic groan, the rusted hinges gave way. The heavy iron grate swung open, revealing the pitch-black abyss of the drainage tunnel. Elena kicked to the surface, breaking the water just as the M240 opened up again, tearing the roof of the dome completely off. Go, 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 Elena screamed, hauling Katya and the other 3 screaming women into the deep end of the pool and shoving them toward the submerged tunnel. Hold your breath and follow the current. Katya dove. The others followed, disappearing into the dark water. Only Maya remained, treading water, looking terrified. Elena, what about you? I'm right behind you, Elena said, her amber eyes locking onto the breached doorway. Through the smoke and the falling glass, 5 heavily armored mercenaries stepped into the ruins of the conservatory. Their rifles raised, sweeping the area. They had breached. Target is in the pool, one of them yelled, raising his weapon. Dive, Elena roared, shoving Maya underwater. Elena raised her right arm, the Glock breaking the surface of the water. She fired 3 rapid shots, striking the lead mercenary in the chest plate, dropping him to his knees, and buying the exact fraction of a second she needed. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs, and slipped beneath the surface. She swam straight into the dark, churning maw of the drainage pipe, just as a hail of bullets tore through the water where she had been floating a heartbeat before. The glass cage was broken, but the descent into the darkness was far from over. The water was a pitch-black, roaring sensory void. The moment Elena slipped beneath the surface, the deafening chaos of the gunfight was instantly replaced by the terrifying, rushing hum of the compound's industrial filtration system. The current in the 3-foot drainage pipe was unnatural and aggressive, a mechanical undertow pulling them deep into the subterranean bowels of the island. Elena kept her eyes open, though it was useless. It was absolute, crushing darkness. She kicked hard, her right hand gripping the waterlogged Glock, her left arm extended forward to feel for the walls of the pipe, ignoring the searing burn of the bullet graze on her thigh. Ahead of her, someone kicked frantically, their heel glancing off Elena's injured shoulder. The pain was a blinding white flash behind her eyelids, but she swallowed the groan, turning it into a burst of forward momentum. 30 seconds. Her internal clock ticked. Lungs are burning. The girls don't have the breath control for this. Just as the primal panic of drowning began to claw at the edges of her mind, the tight confines of the pipe vanished. The current diffused. Elena broke the surface, gasping violently, the echoing sound of 5 other women coughing and retching filling the dark space. Maya, Elena choked out, treading water in the pitch black. Maya, sound off. Here, a small, terrified voice echoed to her left. I'm here. I have Katya. The others? Elena called out, her voice cutting through the panic with the sharp edge of command. We're alive, one of the unnamed women sobbed, the heavy accent thick with terror. Elena blinked, her eyes adjusting to the minuscule amount of light bleeding through heavy iron grating high above them. They were in a massive, subterranean cistern, a concrete cavern that held the compound's water supply. The air was frigid, thick with the smell of heavy chlorine and damp earth. Swim to the edge, Elena ordered. Find the concrete lip and pull yourselves up. Move. Elena swam to the nearest wall, her fingers finding the rough, algae-slicked edge of a maintenance catwalk. She hauled herself out of the water, her muscles screaming in protest. She reached back into the dark water, grabbing arms and shoulders, dragging the exhausted, freezing women onto the hard concrete. They collapsed in a shivering, weeping pile. Maya immediately crawled to Elena, burying her wet face in her sister's chest. Elena wrapped her good arm around Maya, holding her tight, pressing a kiss to her soaked hair. "You did it, baby girl," Elena whispered fiercely into the darkness. "You did perfectly." Elena gently pushed Maya back, forcing her brain to shift from sister to medic. She ran her hands over her own body, doing a rapid triage. The graze on her right thigh was bleeding freely. A hot, sticky trail down her leg. Her left collarbone felt like ground glass. The tiny .22 Magnum had slipped from her waistband in the current and was gone. She still had the Glock 19. Glocks were built to fire after being submerged, but the suppressor was likely waterlogged, which meant the next shot would be loud, and the back pressure might jam the slide. She had 3 rounds left in the magazine. "Are we safe?" Katya whispered, her teeth chattering so hard the sound echoed off the concrete walls. "No," Elena said, her voice a calm anchor in the dark. Candor was the only currency that mattered now. "They know the schematics of this island. They know exactly where this pipe leads. The dogs can't track us through the water, but the men above us are already moving to cut us off." As if on cue, the muffled, heavy thud of combat boots hammered against the ceiling directly above them. Dust and rust rained down as a heavy iron access hatch was violently wrenched open. A beam of blinding white halogen light stabbed down into the cistern, cutting through the darkness, sweeping the water just 20 yards from where they sat. "Check the water," a voice barked from the hatch above. "Sweep the catwalks. If they're in the outflow system, they're heading for the seawall." Elena pressed herself flat against the concrete, pushing Maya and the others down into the absolute shadows against the wall. She held her breath as the flashlight beam tracked dangerously close, illuminating the churning water they had just escaped. The beam moved past them, painting the far end of the cavern. It illuminated a heavy steel bulkhead door marked with faded yellow stenciling, "Primary outflow, docks." "There," Elena whispered, pointing into the dark. "That's our exit." The light from above snapped away, and the hatch slammed shut. The muffled footsteps began running directly above the catwalk, heading toward the outflow door. "They're going to beat us there," Maya breathed, panic rising in her chest again. "Elena, they have guns. We have nowhere to hide." "They have guns," Elena agreed quietly, rising to a crouch and checking the chamber of her Glock in the dark by feel. "But they don't have me." Elena tore a long strip of silk from the ruined hem of her slip and bound it tightly around her bleeding thigh, knotting it with vicious force to stem the bleeding. "Stand up. Hold on to the person in front of you," Elena commanded. "Do not let go. Step exactly where I step. If I stop, you freeze." The girls formed a human chain in the dark, trembling and terrified, with Maya directly behind Elena, clutching the back of her sister's torn slip. Elena led them along the narrow concrete catwalk, navigating by the faint ambient light bleeding from the distant outflow door. The cold was setting in. Hypothermia was a ticking clock, draining their adrenaline and slowing their reflexes. They were halfway across the massive cistern when a heavy, metallic clang echoed from the darkness ahead. Elena stopped dead. The human chain bumped into her, freezing in place. Ahead of them, the heavy steel bulkhead door of the outflow tunnel ground open. 2 silhouettes stepped through the doorway, backlit by the dim emergency lights of the tunnel beyond. They were level 5 mercenaries, heavily armored, carrying suppressed MP5 submachine guns. But worst of all, they were wearing dual-tube night vision goggles. In the pitch black of the cistern, the mercenaries could see them as clear as day. "Bravo 2, we are in the cistern," one of the guards said into his radio, his voice echoing over the water. "Sweeping the catwalk now." The guard slowly turned his head. The glowing green lenses of his night vision goggles swept across the dark cavern, stopping dead on the cluster of shivering women huddled against the wall. "Contact," the guard said, raising his submachine gun. "I have visual on the targets. Center catwalk." They had 3 seconds before the mercenaries opened fire and turned the narrow walkway into a slaughterhouse. Elena didn't have cover. She didn't have the element of surprise. And a waterlogged Glock against two automatic weapons was a losing equation. So, she changed the math. "Get down," Elena screamed, shoving Maya backward into the other girls, knocking them all flat against the concrete. Elena didn't shoot. Instead, she took one explosive step to the right and threw herself off the catwalk, plummeting back into the freezing black water of the cistern. Peefed PFFT. A suppressed burst of 9mm rounds chewed up the concrete exactly where she had been standing, showering Maya and Katya in stinging rock dust. "Target is in the water," the second guard yelled, stepping forward, sweeping his MP5 toward the dark surface of the pool. "Keep the girls pinned. I'll light up the water." Underwater, Elena kicked frantically. The night vision goggles couldn't see through the churning, heavily chlorinated water. She was invisible. She swam directly toward the edge of the catwalk where the two mercenaries were standing. Above her, bullets punched through the surface, leaving hissing trails of bubbles as they lost momentum in the deep water. Elena surfaced silently, perfectly positioned in the blind spot directly beneath the metal grating where the second guard was standing. She reached up through the gaps in the grate. Her hands found the heavy combat boot of the mercenary. With a vicious, explosive surge of power, Elena yanked the man's leg backward. The guard let out a yell of surprise. His balance instantly shattered. He pitched forward, his heavy tactical armor acting like an anchor as he tumbled off the catwalk and crashed headfirst into the freezing water. The splash was deafening. The first guard spun around in shock, his night vision goggles temporarily blinded by the sudden splash of water reflecting the ambient light. "Marco, talk to me." Elena didn't give him the chance to recover. Using the metal struts of the catwalk, she vaulted herself out of the water like a striking viper. She launched her body upward, wrapping her legs around the remaining guard's neck in a flying triangle choke. The momentum carried them both backward, crashing heavily onto the hard concrete of the catwalk. The guard gagged, his hands frantically clawing at Elena's legs. Dropping his submachine gun, Elena tightened her thighs with bone-crushing force, simultaneously drawing her Glock and driving the butt of the pistol directly into the glowing green lenses of his night vision goggles. Glass shattered. The guard went limp, unconscious before his brain could even process the pain. Below them in the water, the first guard broke the surface, gasping and thrashing, struggling under the weight of his waterlogged armor. He reached for his sidearm. Elena rolled off the unconscious guard, leaned over the edge of the catwalk, and aimed her Glock down into the churning water. Bang! The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed cavern. The suppressor had indeed been ruined by the water. But the single 9mm round found its mark. The guard in the water went still, slowly sinking beneath the dark surface. Silence descended on the cistern once again, broken only by the echoing splash of the water and the ragged breathing of the terrified girls. Elena stood up, her chest heaving. She kicked the MP5 submachine gun up from the concrete, catching it by the pistol grip, and slung it over her shoulder. She stripped the shattered night vision goggles and the radio off the unconscious guard at her feet. "Elena?" Maya whispered, peeking over her arms from where she lay on the catwalk. "I'm here," Elena said, her voice tight but steady. She walked back to her sister, helping Maya to her feet. "Everyone up. We're out of time. That gunshot just told every man on this island exactly where we are." They hurried past the bodies, stepping through the heavy steel bulkhead door and into the outflow tunnel. The tunnel sloped downward, the smell of chlorine giving way to the sharp, unmistakable scent of salt, seaweed, and diesel fuel. They could hear the crash of waves echoing off stone. They ran until the tunnel ended abruptly at a massive, rusted iron grate. Elena gripped the bars, looking out. They were at sea level, built directly into the jagged cliffs on the backside of the island. Less than 50 yards away lay the private docks. The luxury superyacht, the Serena, was moored there, glowing like a floating palace. But between their hidden outflow grate and the yacht lay a small army. At least 30 heavily armed mercenaries were swarming the docks, setting up floodlights and mounting heavy machine guns on the patrol boats. "Oh my God," Katya sobbed softly. staring through the bars at the overwhelming force. There's too many. We made it this far. But, we can't fight them all. Maya looked at her older sister. Her green eyes filled with a heartbreaking mix of absolute trust and absolute despair. How do we get out of here? Elena stared through the rusted bars, her amber eyes reflecting the sweeping floodlights of the docks. She looked at the terrified girls behind her. They couldn't run. They couldn't fight an army. We don't fight them, Elena said, a cold, dangerous resolve settling over her features. She looked up at the towering, opulent yacht that had brought them to this hell. We steal their ship. The rusted iron grate separating the outflow tunnel from the ocean was heavy, industrial, and bolted directly into the stone. But salt and time are the enemies of iron. Elena handed the MP5 to Maya. The younger girl took the heavy weapon with trembling hands, her green eyes wide. Don't shoot unless someone comes down that tunnel, Elena ordered softly. Elena grabbed 2 of the thickest iron bars. She planted her bare feet against the slick, mossy stone of the tunnel wall, bent her knees, and pulled. She didn't rely on arm strength. She used the mechanical leverage of her entire body, engaging her core and her legs, ignoring the screaming pain in her left collarbone. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, with a tortured, metallic groan, the rusted bolts on the right side of the grate sheared off. The heavy iron swung outward, splashing into the dark water below. The path was open. Elena turned back to the 5 shivering women huddled in the tunnel. Beyond them, through the opening, the docks were a hive of lethal activity. At least 30 heavily armed mercenaries were fueling up 2 sleek, black patrol boats, preparing to hunt them down. The Serena, the massive 150-foot superyacht, idled at the far end of the pier, its deep engines purring, ready to move Silas or his lieutenants if the island fell. Listen to me, Elena said, her voice cutting through the distant sound of shouting guards and revving engines. I can't shoot 30 men. We need a distraction, a big one. She pointed to a massive, cylindrical bulk fuel tank sitting on the concrete pier, connected by heavy rubber hoses to the patrol boats. I'm going to swim out and rig that tank. When it blows, every single guard on that dock is going to run toward the fire. That is your window. Elena locked eyes with her sister. Maya, you lead them. You swim directly for the stern of the yacht. There's a hydraulic swim platform at the back. Get on it and stay low. Do you understand? But what about you? Katya asked, her voice cracking. I'll be on the bridge, Elena said, her amber eyes reflecting the cold, deadly promise of a seasoned operator. Taking the wheel. Before Maya could protest, Elena took the MP5 back, slung it tight across her back, and slipped silently through the broken grate into the freezing, oily water of the bay. She swam a breaststroke, keeping her head barely above the surface, using the heavy wooden pilings of the pier for cover. The water was black, reeking of diesel. Above her, the heavy boots of the mercenaries thudded against the concrete. All units, load up. They have to be heading for the tree line, a commander yelled over a bullhorn. Elena reached the wooden piling directly beneath the massive fuel tank. She pulled herself halfway out of the water, clinging to the barnacle-encrusted wood. She drew the MP5. She didn't have explosives, but she had 9mm rounds and a pressurized tank full of high-octane marine fuel. She aimed carefully at the heavy brass valve at the base of the tank. Pop, pop, pop. The suppressed burst shattered the valve. Instantly, high-octane fuel began to geyser out, pouring over the concrete pier and pooling around the boots of the mercenaries and the idling engines of the patrol boats. Fuel leak. Shut it off, someone screamed, panic suddenly cutting through the disciplined ranks. Elena didn't wait. She sighted the MP5 on a sparking floodlight generator sitting right next to the expanding puddle of fuel. She squeezed the trigger. The generator exploded in a shower of electrical sparks. The sparks hit the vapor. The explosion was magnificent and terrifying. A massive, roaring fireball erupted into the night sky, instantly engulfing the 2 patrol boats and throwing half a dozen mercenaries into the water. The shockwave rippled across the bay, shattering the windows of the nearby boathouses and turning the night as bright as day. Absolute, screaming chaos consumed the docks. Every remaining guard sprinted toward the inferno. dragging hoses, yelling into radios, completely abandoning their posts. Elena didn't watch the fire. She dove underwater and swam with everything she had toward the Serena. She broke the surface at the stern of the superyacht. She reached up, grabbing the edge of the teakwood swim platform, and hauled herself aboard. She moved up the portside stairs like a ghost. 2 guards were stationed on the aft deck, but they were leaning over the railing, staring in shock at the towering inferno on the docks. Elena didn't hesitate. She closed the distance, grabbed the first guard by the back of his tactical vest, and hurled him over the railing into the bay. Before the second guard could even turn around, Elena drove the heavy stock of the MP5 directly into his temple. He crumpled to the teak deck without a sound. She sprinted up the spiral glass staircase to the bridge. The captain, a man in a crisp white uniform, was frantically hitting buttons on the console, reaching for the throttle. Cast off now, he yelled into a radio. Step away from the helm, Elena commanded, leveling the submachine gun at his chest. The captain froze, raising his hands slowly. He looked at the bruised, bleeding, barefoot woman in the torn silk slip, holding a weapon with terrifying familiarity. He stepped back. Elena slammed her hand onto the bridge console, hitting the release for the hydraulic swim platform at the stern. She keyed the yacht's external camera system. On the screen, she saw them, 5 heads bobbing in the dark water, swimming desperately through the wake of the explosion toward the back of the yacht. Maya was leading them, pulling Katya along. They scrambled onto the lowered platform, huddling together against the fiberglass hull. "They're on," Elena whispered. She grabbed the captain by the collar and shoved him toward the door. "Get off my ship." The man didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted down the stairs and dove off the side of the yacht into the water. Elena turned back to the helm. She slammed the heavy throttles all the way forward. The Serena's massive, twin V16 diesel engines roared to life, churning the water into a violent white froth. She didn't have time to untie the mooring lines. The sheer, 10.000 horsepower force of the superyacht surged forward, snapping the thick nautical ropes with a sound like cannon fire, tearing the heavy iron cleats straight out of the concrete pier. The yacht lurched violently, breaking free. Down on the burning docks, the surviving mercenaries finally realized what was happening. "The ship! They're taking the ship!" a voice screamed over the roar of the flames. Dozens of assault rifles opened up. A hail of 5.56 and 7.62 rounds chased them, pinging off the heavy, reinforced fiberglass hull of the superyacht and shattering the reinforced glass of the bridge. Elena ducked low, keeping one hand on the steering wheel, cutting the wheel hard to starboard. The massive yacht carved a sharp, aggressive turn, shielding the stern platform from the gunfire and pointing the bow directly toward the open, dark expanse of the Caribbean Sea. The island of the clearing, with its burning docks, its shattered glass dome, and its broken syndicate, rapidly shrank in the rearview monitors. The gunfire faded into the distance, swallowed by the roar of the engines and the crashing waves. Elena engaged the autopilot, locking their heading toward the international waters off the coast of Florida. She dropped the empty MP5 onto the deck. The adrenaline that had sustained her for the last 4 hours finally began to crash, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Every muscle ached. She was bleeding, bruised, and freezing. But as she walked down the stairs to the aft deck, none of that mattered. Maya was sitting on the teakwood deck, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket she had pulled from a deck box. Katya and the others were huddled nearby, crying tears of disbelief and overwhelming relief. Maya looked up. When she saw Elena, she threw the blanket aside and ran to her. They collapsed onto the deck together, holding each other so tightly it was hard to tell where one sister ended and the other began. Maya buried her face in Elena's neck, sobbing uncontrollably, the trauma of the last 7 months finally breaking open under the safety of the open sky. Elena closed her eyes, resting her chin on Maya's wet hair, the amber fire in her eyes, the lethal, cold calculation of the Tier 1 operator, slowly extinguished. The ghost had done her job. The monster was dead. "I've got you," Elena whispered to the ocean wind, rocking her sister back and forth as the yacht tore through the waves toward the dawn. "We're going home."